Well, part 2 was a lot harder to get through than part 1 was. Not so much because the emotional turmoil of the characters, which, I mean, from the title of the book roughly translating to The Misery, I kind of anticipated that this was not going to be a very happy story with potentially unhappy endings. What I did not anticipate is just how much this part is just wasting my time. So, probably the first thing to mention is that how this part begins is with a very detailed history of the events happening at the Battle of Waterloo. Now, if you were somebody that's really interested in the history of Napoleon Bonaparte, this is probably a very intriguing section. But if you're here for the story like me, you're just like, okay, what does this all wrap around to? Very little, in all honesty. And I could definitely say this definitely put into perspective why this book took so long to write. I am very much reminded at the other waste of time, which was the infamous 70-page speech in At the Shrugged, which the author was hopped up on amphetamines to finish within 2 years. That was just one section. This book has two of them in this section alone. I do remember when I was reading through Gone with the Wind, I was kind of annoyed how Margaret had a bit of a habit of repeating certain phrases like, oh, how could they not tell she was suffering? How could they not tell that she was in love with somebody else instead of this? Like, I will take that compared to this section. Anyway, that is the major complaint out of the way. So, like, 70 pages detailing the history of Waterloo. At least he was able to keep it kind of interesting, but about the only thing it amounts to is that the amount of bodies lost on the battlefield could not be buried. So, in a last ditch effort, they just kind of crammed them all down a local well. And there is this one guy that is considered like the lowest human being on the planet. Essentially, they dress in the uniform of an armed serviceman and follow the battles. And then after the battle is gone, they just kind of loot the bodies for whatever they can find. They do kind of humanize this guy as, well, there was one person about 3 layers deep in the well that was just alive. He's able to pull him out of the well, but not before snatching his wallet first. And this is kind of where it comes back into the story. So the captain that got saved is just like, what is your name? And I'm just gonna say it. I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation as I'm probably gonna butcher so many other names in this book. I want to say it's Thunderous offhand, even though I felt like I just added a bit of a Spanish flavor to a French character. But anyway, it's to paint that this guy is not to be trusted. And who is this man? He is the one that runs the inn that Cosette from part 1 was kept in the care of. Now that Fantine is dead, basically they could just do whatever they want with the child because they're clearly not getting any money out of Fantine anymore. And what they do to this child is usually just doing all the chores that neither the couple nor they want their kids to do. So, probably the biggest task is that there is a wellspring that the inn gets the water from. This is about 3 miles away. And for somebody that's just 8 years old, you can imagine that's quite a trek, let alone carrying a bucket that's about the size of her, full of water. It is Christmas Day that she is sent to get another bucket of water. Something that she had been dreading because she knew that it was going to be very dark out, it was going to be very cold, And it's not like they had streetlights back at this time, or at least because it's a remote area, they wouldn't have streetlights. So it is very dark and it's very hard to find the way. Well, the customers run out of water, and she is tasked with having to pick it up. She is able to make it there just fine when she starts filling up her bucket. Now, the important thing to note here is, in addition to filling up the water, she was also given some money to be able to pay for the service. However, since it's a holiday, there isn't really anyone there to collect on getting the spring water. So, as she is leaning over to get the water in the bucket, the coin falls out of her overalls. And this is a detail she does not figure out when she starts heading back, just barely trudging to keep that water as it sloshes along the way. However, as fate would have it, her guardian angel appears, and probably not the prettiest guardian angel that she was expecting. This appears to be more of a vagabond that is seen to be in pretty good shape, as well as having this very distinct yellow coat to him. It's kind of interesting as the two get the chat for a while. He kind of jumps up at the idea that the child's name is Cosette. Cosette, basically due to all the trauma that she had to live throughout her life, finds this person to be more of a positive effect going on. So it's like, well, if this guy robs me, who cares? At least I don't have to live much longer in this miserable life of mine. So they both walk and talk together. In fact, he even carries the bucket for her. So he comes looking for a room at the inn. To which the first thing that they want to know is why Cosette is being the lazy bum that she always is. And, well, they're thankful that this mysterious man dropped off the bucket. When the missus is just like, yeah, so where's that money I gave you? She pats herself down to try to figure out where it went. It was gone. Before any beatings continue, the mysterious man in the yellow jacket pulls out a coin that is twice as valuable as what Cosette dropped in the well. The missus doesn't question this, but just takes the money as a bit of a favor. But it also marks that this guy is probably a fair bit richer than he looks. The man in the yellow jacket decides to rent a room for the night. And given this wealth that he is perceived to have, the couple decide to put him in the most expensive suite in the entire inn. He attempts to try to dissuade them, but it just doesn't work. They don't listen, and he's just like, all right, fine, so he puts the money on the table. As he is sitting there at the inn waiting for his dinner, he notices Cosette doing all these little chores while her step-siblings are just going about their business, having fun, like what all children should do. So, he brings this to the attention of the missus. He's just like, well, why does she get to do all the work? Well, she's not one of us. She has to earn her pay. And so he reaches into his pocket and pulls out some money and says, here, I will pay for her. She is a little annoyed about this at first, but she ends up pocketing the money, and Cosette attempts to have some fun. Something she is just not accustomed to, so she is just left wondering, how do you have fun? She did have this lead sword that she would just kind of wrap up in rags as means of a makeshift doll. As the other kids were playing with their doll, they let it down as they are no longer enjoying it anymore. So Cosette decides to go for the doll and play with the real toy for a change. The missus figures this out and starts scolding her. As this happens, the man in the yellow jacket goes just outside the inn. Cosette is receiving one of the biggest beatings of her life, but when the man comes back, he comes with this doll that is just as big as her. Cosette is obviously shocked by this. It's just like, you're showing me kindness? I'm not sure if you get with the program, but I'm the lark. I'm the one everybody makes fun of. I'm the one that sweeps the streets because I'm not good for anything else. But he's just like, no, you've earned this. This is yours. And once again, the missus is very annoyed by this, but it's not like she can turn around and sell it within this mysterious stranger's presence. So he gives her the doll and then spends the night. As the couple is going to bed, both of them are talking at the idea that Cosette has outlived her usefulness. Since Fantine is no longer giving them any money, she is really just a liability. And so they were planning on selling her, which works out fantastically as the man in the yellow jacket is like, you know what? I'll buy this child from you. They're pretty happy with the transaction when the pair start to walk away. Obviously, with Cosette being a little shocked at the idea that somebody actually wants her around. And even as they walk away, the man in the yellow jacket gives her a new dress rather than the usual rags that she's been wearing around. They both go on their journey to this mysterious man's house. Being pursued by the Mister, he realizes that he could have gotten a lot more money out of this guy. So he catches up with them and tries to come up with the excuse of like, oh, well, we're legal guardians, we can't just sell you like that. We need express permission. So from this jacket, he pulls out a little scroll with Fantine's handwriting saying that he is the proper owner of this child. The Mister is very much annoyed that he didn't bring his gun with him, as he wanted to try to hold him up at gunpoint. However, as a way to try to get some more money, it's just like, so, what town are you heading? However, this guy's just like, none of your business. This is my child now. Leave us alone. Defeated, he heads back to the inn, and the pair go off on their own way. Now it is at this time we turn back to the fate of Jean Valjean, who admitted to the crime of highway robbery, as well as stealing the candlesticks from the bishop. He is serving life in prison. One of his biggest things is that he is on a boat doing his usual renovations. This is something that I guess prisoners at that time had to do. He is in charge of the rigging when there's this one passerby that wanted to see the restoration of this boat falls overboard. His overseers didn't really question the idea that he was able to get out of his bonds so quickly, and he was able to jump over the edge to rescue the man. The man comes up to the surface, but Jean Valjean does not. With such a deed, he is almost given the title of knighthood, but since he is dead, he is unable to collect on such things. Now, we go back to the mysterious man in the yellow jacket. Goes into this somewhat derelict duplex. It's owned by this very old woman. So, the man and the child surprisingly have a lot in common. The idea that they were rejected by society, but yet they find mutual love in each other. They live in that humble little cottage for a few months when all of a sudden there's this mysterious beggar. So, it's been said that the man in the yellow jacket, he has quite a lot of money to his name. And so it was a bit mysterious, the idea that somebody that could look just as awful as he was had a ton of money. The local police captain, the same man that sent Jean Valjean to life in prison, he is very curious about this mysterious passerby, so he takes the place of the beggar that the man in the yellow jacket has been giving alms to. There, the two meet face to face. And it is revealed beyond the shadow of a doubt that this man in the yellow jacket is Jean Valjean. He faked his death, he was able to get the jacket off of a second-hand store, and all the money was something that he had been saving for a rainy day. In fact, it was speculated that he buried a major sum of money back when he was in charge of the factory. Thankfully, there is a bit of an urban legend in that area that if you go looking around for that treasure, instead you'll find the guy with the shovel is the devil himself, and your soul will be taken within 1 week of seeing him. So, nobody messed with Jean's treasure. However, in seeing that the beggar was replaced with Jarvet, he knows that he has to get out of there in a hurry. There was a lot of scattering, and it seemed like for a little bit, Jean actually eluded the captors. However, he looks up to a roadblock up ahead to see that there's a squad of policemen surrounding this little culvert where there's only really 4 major exits, as well as this very old, disrepaired house. With no other option, Jean basically ties Cosette to him and climbs the mysterious building. Now, in case you're wondering where he got the rope from, this is just outside of Paris, and there are streetlights in this area. In the rope is a lamp lighter's tool to be able to get up there and light the lamp. He was able to get the rope from there, descend it into the building, to find that this place is a monastery. And thankfully enough, the person he bumps into in the monastery is the same man that was being crushed by the cart that Jean Valjean saved. And then from there, the book spends another 70 pages just describing the nunnery system, the monasteries, and it is not really painted in the prettiest of lights. It is basically a voluntary prison, where instead of having to pay your debt to society, essentially you undergo this extra suffering as a way to seek favor with the Almighty. I know we're definitely getting into some more spiritual territory, but, well, it is a Catholic monastery, so of course Catholicism is going to be mentioned here. And it's all just about the idea that, well, the prison system does have more perks than the monastery system does. If it's cold, the prisoners get a fire. The monks and the nuns just see it as an extra layer of suffering to better secure their place in heaven. The prisoners get wool uniforms. The nuns and the monks sometimes do, depending on the monastery. Each one has their own rules as to what flavor each person must suffer in. And the whole time, it's just kind of crazy that the idea that the prison system, you pay your debt to society, you can potentially live at least a half-life. I mean, sure, you're going to be considered a convict all your life, but at least you can live. While in the convent system, it's the idea of throwing away your life. You lose your name, you just become another number in the monastery, much like in the prison system. So, it goes on like this for a very long time, when we finally get back to the little cottage of the man that Jean Valjean saved. And there's a bit of a plan as to what to be able to do next. The basic idea is that this man had a brother named Maximus, which no one in this nunnery has ever seen before. So it's kind of the idea that it's just like, oh yeah, this is my brother, and this is his granddaughter. Because even though he is quite fit, he is still quite on in age, this Jean Valjean, so that's like the only explanation there. However, the major trick is that Jean as well as Cosette have to both be sneaked out of the nunnery. And the whole time, the guy's just like, How in the world did you even get in here? I mean, there's like steep gables and whatnot. You obviously weren't able to get in through the front door. Were you like some sort of divine sign? You just came right from heaven to prove my worthiness? And the whole time, Jean just keeps changing the subject. And well, this man has become a bit more simple because he's just been living with the faith. That's about all he really understands is how to interact with the other nuns. And that is the main thing to mention, is because he lives in a nunnery, being the one man in a group of women in an ecclesiastical sense, he is given some severe restrictions, including this little bell that he wears around his crippled knee, an accident from when the cart crushed him. And this is a way to just kind of warn the nuns to hurry up and turn away, lest all that sexual tension that you've had for like 50 years come out in one fell swoop. I guess that comes to think about it. Imagine a lesbian nun now. That must have been pretty difficult. But kind of that commentary aside, how in the world they are able to get out of there? A long-standing nun has died, and she is requested to be buried underneath the altar. Now, even though this man that nearly crushed by the cart has his mind mostly just dedicated to faith, he was a lawyer at one point, and he's just like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. You can't just bury somebody in your house without, like, some sort of written authority. However, the nuns are just like, we are the authority. They follow us. However, the undertaker still needed to take something away from the nunnery. So how it works is that Cosette was going to be smuggled in a basket outside to a local friend. Now, Cosette, it's pretty easy for her to stay quiet, as basically any threat that the evil innkeepers might come along if she doesn't do exactly what she has said basically petrifies her to no end. So she goes, following the story that Jean Valjean is Ultimus, this guy's older brother, and how it works for Jean Valjean to get out of there is that while the nun is being buried under the altar, the undertakers are going to be taking the coffin with Jean Valjean inside. The coffin is rigged in such a way that he will be at least able to breathe, and it won't be too difficult for him to get out of there. Now the plan is that when he rolls up to the graveyard, it's going to be with a long-standing priest friend that is going to say the mass for this nun. And he's a pretty easy person to convince to get drunk, and then once he is drunk, you can just do whatever you want with him. However, fate had other plans, as the happy priest that was quick with the bottle has unfortunately died. Probably to cirrhosis of the liver, now that I'm thinking about it. And this guy is very hard up for cash, so it's just like, no, we gotta do this job. You're not gonna convince me to get a drink. We gotta bury this so that I can get some money, so I can be part of my real job as being a literary expert. But first, I gotta pay for this schooling by being a gravedigger. Do you got it? So, how the man was able to get Jean out of the coffin. Essentially, anybody that is in the gravedigging business has to have this small card on them, as the graveyard is set to close exactly at 6 o'clock at night. And if you're on the inside without the card, you'd have to pay a substantial fine of 15 francs. Not really sure what exactly that equates to in today's money, but, well, it is considered a pretty substantial fine. And part of me is kind of wondering why this fine is there in the first place, but anyway, how the man that was about to get destroyed by the cart did it is that he took the card out to the gravedigger as he was shoveling clumps of dirt, puts it into his pocket, and he's just like, oh yeah, it's getting kind of late, isn't it? Do you got your card? Of course I got my card. So just like Cosette with the coin is just kind of feeling himself all over, and it's just like, oh no, I must have left it at home. Hurry, go home. You have like maybe 5 minutes to get out of the graveyard. I'll make sure this guy doesn't escape, okay? And then when you come back with the card, then we'll just bury him and go from there. Now, there were a few clumps of dirt that were thrown on top of the coffin, one of them covering the breathing hole. So, the guy is able to get Jean out of the coffin. However, he is passed out from lack of oxygen, and the whole time it's just like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do with Cosette? There's just like so many variables here. This was not the way it was supposed to go. Why would the Almighty do such a thing? And as he's doing this, Jean Valjean takes a few breaths, and the man is just most overjoyed that he is alive. So, the two fill in the grave. Everything is satisfied in terms of legal, and the card is then dropped off to the gravedigger, with Jean waiting outside, because obviously the gravedigger would just be like, okay, well, who's this guy? And so, the plan worked. Jean Valjean takes the place of the man as the local gardener, and Cosette is enrolled in the Catholic school there. And for the time being, it seems like life is actually turning out right. While Jean is rather annoyed that he's basically in another prison, it is completely worth it, just for the sake of seeing Cosette smile, to be able to laugh, to be able to enjoy living. That is the only motivation that he needs and he will ever need. And that is the end of part 2. Now, part 1, I know Victor had quite a tendency to ramble on for a little bit. That is nothing compared to this section. You will notice that I was able to summarize this section relatively quickly compared to the first section. And that is just because he just keeps getting so bogged down in the details. It's a lot like when I was reading Moby Dick all over again. But the difference is the amount of descriptions is the same, but yet the book is a lot bigger, so there is a lot more room for stories. So my time feels like it's being wasted, but not as much as it did with that book, and especially not as much as when I read the abridgment of War and Peace. Like, I cannot imagine how much of an incredible waste of time the unabridged version of War and Peace would have been. And once again, I don't understand why that's the book that has the praise, because this one came out like 2 years earlier than that, and look, it is thicker. It probably puts War and Peace to shame if it's not potentially the same length. There's just as many characters, and in my opinion, the characters in this book are far more interesting. So, I'm really hoping that part 3 we actually get some more story. Because basically, the first 10 or 15 pages I've read of it so far, it's just describing what the local street urchins are like, and the idea that through them is the very soul of Paris. And like other street urchins, you don't have to worry about them becoming murderers and thieves. For some odd reason, it just hardens them up rather than makes them awful people. So, we'll see where it goes. I mean, trying to figure out where it can go unless Jarvis somehow gets authority to be able to sneak into this nunnery. I mean, it seems like it could have ended. It was a happy ending. I mean, Jean and Cosette, those are basically the main characters of the book. They're in a happy place. And I don't even think we're halfway through the book, so what else happens to these two? Until next time, keep having fun.